We have had quite a lot of discussions during these 2 days. We have talked about policy in the pharmaceutical sector. So now it is time to talk about something that has to do with the partners, about the things that need to happen in the healthcare system so that the policies can actually bring about the expected results. And when we talk about health technology, the results we expect are, first, improvement of access, always in a framework of a predefined budget. There are some more, and we will touch upon them later. So today, we will have this discussion in order to understand where we currently are, where we stand today. We have had similar discussions in the past, but now we will talk about what needs to change in an environment that has changed quite a lot. We had a similar discussion last year, and of course, many things have changed since then. And I'm sure that next year, if we have the same discussion, we will come up with a lot of changes and differences. Starting on my left, with regard to the issues that we need to identify. In order for a transformation of healthcare to be successful, what would you say these points are? Look, first of all, there has to be a plan. There is an old adage according to which having just one plan is better than having none. I'm not sure whether we have a plan for healthcare, excuse me. Of course, pharmaceutical care is part of the health system, so there has to be a wider plan for the health system. However, I would like to focus on my area of expertise because I don't believe that I'm the right person to talk about the health system in general. So right now, and given the point that we have reached, because, okay, we're not called upon to come up with a plan and to start from scratch. No, we operate in a given environment and we need to take this into account. So what we need to do is to develop a plan that will be based on 3 pillars. The first is the revision of funding, something that we have been talking about for so many years. This government has indeed contributed to the improvement of funding compared to the past. On the other hand, it does not take into account the needs. And this is one of the reasons of the lack of a plan, because if there were a plan, we would be able to identify the problems, measure the scale, and come up with solutions. The first pillar has to do with funding, as I said. The second pillar has to do with the control of demand. We have repeatedly asked for actions to be taken in this direction. And if I take a look at the numbers that play a decisive role, I can draw the conclusion that there hasn't been any result. The third pillar is the leveraging of data and of their potential. If we find a way to leverage the data that we actually collect, if we manage to improve their quality, and if we manage to make the adequate analysis, then we will be in the position to make more rational decisions. Decisions about measures that will have a long-term effect. Okay, allow me to make a short introduction before I give you the floor. The fact is that we need a strategy that cannot be short-term. since reforms, especially in the health sector, require time in order to be implemented and bring about results. Is there a way to make this happen? How close are we to a long-term planning for the transformation of the pharmaceutical care? Thank you for the question, Mr. Athanasakis. I believe that during the last 2 days, with all the examples that we have heard and with all the developments that we talked about in the context of the panels, it has become obvious that we live and operate in an environment which, of course, is different to the one of last year. But I believe that in the morning, we talked about other countries like Belgium, about the Pact of Cooperation. We talked about Spain and Portugal and the investments it has made in clinical trials. And all these show that there is a way. Remember the example of Belgium. In 4 years' time, they took the decision to guarantee access to innovation. They gave over 1 billion to that, and they became second in clinical trials. So they made it happen in 4 years, Mr. Athanasakis. They became the Pharma Valley in Europe. Why? Because they set it as a target. So I will agree with what Mr. Papadimitriou said. Of course, when we talk about funding policies and policies in general promote innovation for patients, we need to take the relevant decisions. We need to start. No state has an infinite budget that can be allocated to the health sector. No state has ready-made answers, but the states that have been successful have had a rational use of the resources. You remember what I had said during the first fire chat. The 50 millions that we currently have is a beginning, is a start, yes. But can we possibly claim that with these we can ensure access of patients to innovation? Of course not. So, in my view, there has to be a long-term planning, and I would like to add something to everything we said. There are 3 other things that are absolutely necessary, and we have talked about this with you. First of all, we need to know the value we want to get. If we want to have access to innovation, we need to focus on that. And I believe that Mr. Boumpas rightly highlighted the value of innovation. Second, we need to have the processes, all of which need to follow the same direction. We said that in the previous panel, and it is based on the assessment and the introduction of therapeutic solutions up to reimbursement, that there has to be one rationale and one direction. You cannot passively say that you're going to do something and then not being able to measure the results. You need to be able to follow a process, an integrated process, and be able to measure. I apologize for interrupting you. Please. Any type of agreement between the stakeholders in the pharmaceutical policy, is there any chance of that happening? Yes, exactly. This is exactly the example of Belgium. There, they had an agreement. Okay, it took them 8 months to negotiate, but they came to an agreement and they made it happen. So it is not something impossible. And the last thing that I want to say, and we have talked about it with you, Mr. Athanasakis, is the value of performance. What do we consider as a success? Is it a success to have 15 prevention programs or 30 clinical trials? What is success? In my view, success means that a patient who had an unmet need now has a therapeutic solution. And from diagnosis to treatment, there is something that cannot be eliminated. This is exactly what we are trying to achieve with innovation. I would like to share with you a personal discussion. When with Elias, we asked Mrs. de Broek who was the most popular politician in Belgium for 3 years. She replied that she was the most popular politician because she never said anything before taking action, and she only talked when the results were evident. Yes, she was very humble, and in the morning I encouraged her to share with us the results that 170,000 patients took part in the clinical trials. I encouraged her to say that, so we can learn a lot. If this happens here in Greece, all the people will rush to appear on TV. Yes, this is true. And in the context of this plan, Mr. Kotziaras, the pharmaceutical industry can play a role. What can be the position of the pharmaceutical industry? Thank you, Mr. Athanasakis. It is a great pleasure and honor to be here representing 56 pharmaceutical companies. I would like to thank you for the question. I believe that the role of the Greek pharmaceutical industry is extremely important and decisive, not just for the NHS and for covering the unmet needs, but also for the sustainability of the system and more widely for the national economy. I believe that we all agree, the associations and the representatives of the industry, that is, that the problems are quite big. There are many challenges ahead, challenges that are difficult to overcome or resolve. That is why we believe that there has to be an alliance with all the stakeholders in order to guarantee that there will be a control of consumption, second, digitization and data, and third, bridging the funding gap. It has been said that we have a funding deficit of 1 billion euros. We need to discuss about resolving this problem. And the second thing I would like to add, something that has been mentioned in previous panels, is that we need to create fiscal space. And of course, this can happen only through the control of consumption, but also through choosing more cost-effective solutions. This will allow us to create more fiscal space and to channel resources where they are needed. As I said, I represent here one of the most dynamic sectors of the Greek economy. And I would like to touch upon another important gap that exists in the country. And I'm talking about the investment gap, the investment void. Based on data of 2024, we are lagging behind the European average. We invest approximately 16% of the state GDP, when the European Union is at 23%. That is why the Greek pharma industry is here, is present, investing since 2019 1.8 billion euros, which of course will support the NHS, the self-efficiency of the country and the extroversion of the country, always on the basis of the needs of the patients, not just in Greece, but also in Europe. I would like to close with the following. The investment plan has 10 new plants and 14 R&D centers. So I believe that we have now a more dynamic positioning in the European plan that will contribute to the strategic autonomy of the European Union. And we, as a country, can play a very strong role as a productive hub in Southeastern Europe. Yes, a very interesting issue, and we will come back to that.
I'm very glad regarding the new addition in this table, the table of our usual composition, which is, of course, the position of medical devices. Okay, and I'm particularly happy because medical devices are a branch that is particularly expanding and evolving faster in terms of growth than drugs are now and in the next predictable years. So it's very interesting to see what the role of these companies is as represented by the SEIV, the Health Research and Biotechnology Industry Association. Thank you, Kostas. This is the other pillar of the industry, medical devices. We have pharma and medical devices. And of course, they can play the role of a catalyst in the transformation of this health system. I will make a brief reference to what Nico said in the beginning, that we do not have a strategic plan, which is why you ascertained in the study you performed, it's published in Lancet journal. And this is something that we all need to confess to agree to, and to move on. Okay, because we see really different speeds and velocities in the transmission and we'll talk about medical devices primarily, in which one of the strategic goals at the European level is to have realistic approaches in terms of changes here. I'm talking about the MDR and the VDR. That Europe was not ready for this part. Neither were the countries that comprise it, and we need to be realistic. Second, we need to have, and Europe asks that the biotechnological devices are included in the 5-year investment plan of the EU, so as to fund investment and digital health, as well as clinical trials, of course. And the third, coincidentally, in the MFF, we saw a draft, I think the other day, that there is no specific space for health, so you will need to find some vital space. It is in the cards, but it's not yet there. Oh yes, this is one of the strategic goals. So if we want to bring things, or rather no, there's a third point that has to do with how we approach procurements in general, health-related procurements. A system that absorbs a lot of resources. It is funded substantially by the state budget, but its main principle is the price and volume. And this needs to change. We need to combine two things, what we call value-based healthcare and the real-world data. These two combined, okay, can change the model. Now, two real things back into Greece. As you know, we don't have a clear-cut organization or a procedure or process of assessment, evaluation, and reimbursement for biotech. Pharma is indeed ahead, okay, than medical devices, but it is totally lacking in us. So one of the strategic goals should be this, to create a reliable organization to govern HTA in Greece for the medical devices. And it's something that we have discussed this time and again. And to provide for reimbursement so that gradually to, rid ourselves of a clawback and rebate. I can see Olympios nodding. Yes, says Labrina, that's we're 2 steps ahead already. I apologize, Dimitris, for interrupting you again. Now, the second thing I would like to say about Greece is for the national health system to start changing its procurement system. Hospitals already are not trained. They have missed this rationale that I hold tenders on the basis of quality, okay, and this price and quality relationship and the indicators that must be met. And the third is a classic problem that we've had for a number of years. We say this time and again, which is how to make a system that is predictable in terms of hospital funding. How does one not reproduce debts time and again? How we're still struggling and lagging behind in terms of payments. We have more than 230 days as a payment limit, and we do not resolve chronic pathogenies of the systems, which is the way of invoicing, or what we call the materials, that's how we invoice. Yes, and a lot of things will change under the new legislation that is provided for in the Critical Medicines Act. We'll revert to that, but there is an effort indeed, and we would like to inform the audience that the project that will build the HTA for pharma to extend to medical devices as well, with the end date being December. The Secretariat of Strategic Planning is striving to do that. Now, let's discuss, please, the subject of pharma, not from the traditional standpoint, which is that of funding, but to listen to what the industry has to say regarding results and primarily access. I've heard you talk about inequalities in access. Are there such inequalities, and where may they be due to? Now, I will repeat something that I read yesterday and I heard yesterday. But indirectly, it answers to that question. Well, of course there are inequalities in access. in Greece, we have various of the new drugs approved available. There's a big discussion as to how we get them, whether the same terms apply to everyone, whether they arrive in a timely manner. If we take a look at the Wake study, it is clear that the days are long, that the percentage of drugs, those that are licensed every 4 years, is dropping, and there is a slight increase in the number of days that these drugs need to come here. The main reason for this delay, in my opinion, is the mandatory reimbursements. Now, this is a government gazette issue of yesterday, which announces the zero participation of a vulnerable group of patients to all sorts of medicines, all sorts of drugs. I mean, it's an appropriate announcement. I will not characterize it, and seeing which group it pertains to, maybe these people should have received some additional support. So there's a joint ministerial decision that there is an expenditure at the AOP. This additional expenditure will increase the amount of the surplus that is included in the mechanism of automatic clawback of this institution. Now, I'm slightly shocked that this is like spitting something in the other person's face. Okay, it's not just a spit in the face, but you realize that herein lies a mentality and a mindset, which is what? It's that I want to give everything without paying for it. And I'm saying this again, this could be easily misconstrued as my objection to the exemption of these people. When a government wants to do public policy, they need to do that from the taxes that are paid by the citizens, not through the providers. And this little thing here, and this is just about 1 million, this additional expenditure, at least according to the AOP's estimates, but the mentality is there. In the past, they would say, well, 5 million, 5, 10, 15, or whatever. And I'm sorry to revert to the issue of funding, but there are some things, but if one were to review history, is shocking. In 2019, we had a study performed with, commissioned to Deloitte, that included a financial model as to how the expenditure would develop in the next years if nothing happened. In 2019, the gross expense was 5 billion. Deloitte at the time had predicted that in 2023, with 4.5% annual increase, the gross expenditure would be 6 billion. Based on the data we have now, the expenditure in 2023 was 7.5 billion. And what did we say back then? If we don't do anything, it will skyrocket to 6 billion. We did nothing. And despite that, we went even higher, to 7.5 billion. At the moment, we have a new study, a new survey. The estimate is with 5.5 rate of increase, the 2028 expenditure will be close to 10 billion euros. And this is not something that fell from the sky, okay? These are international metrics. These are comparable things that we can see in other countries of Europe or the developed world, to be more general. So if things come to pass and we keep on doing the same things we used to, okay, we don't want to annihilate everything. I mean, it's not that we did nothing, but what we did do led us to this increase of the expenditure. If we keep on doing the same thing, we'll go up to 10 billion. Do you know how much public expenditure must be in 2028 for the industry to be able to drop to a 40% reimbursement? That was the average of reimbursement of 2020, the year, the COVID year. The public expenditure must be 4.8 billion. We are very far from that, and I believe that with these annual injections of 100 million plus the GDP, which is approximately 160 million per year, we will not make it. On the other hand, although decisions on funding move conscientiously around this level, there is no developed will that becomes practice in terms of curtailing and reining in this increase of expenditure, which turns me back to the beginning, which means that it is an established mentality, established mindset. That being said, I'm not particularly optimistic, and further to that, I believe that the inequalities to access will keep on being. And patients will have to take their drugs later, or not all of them will take it. And if a drug comes through EFET, everyone who needs it will receive it. This is not true. Those who will receive it is the people whose doctors made the applications and the committees did not reject them. This is not equality to access, unless one wants to interpret it thusly. Thank you. Now, from what Olympios said, apparently predictions are very difficult things. Predictions are a difficult thing to do, especially when they have to do with the future. Be that as it may, I will attempt to ask you, representing the innovative businesses, companies in this sector, what is something we should do to have equitable and early access? I believe that we've done a lot regarding priorities and everything that was mentioned in respect with funding, with access and everything. I wouldn't want to repeat everything that we've been talking about for this past day and a half. As far as I'm concerned, there is political will, because as I said before, I can see resources and funds being invested, but I don't think it's being done correctly. I can see programs and projects, but I'm not certain that they utilize and serve the results we want to see. And I compare this often with what we say and what we do. Let me give you some additional examples, because I don't want to repeat everything that we've already said. I've said them, other speakers have said them as well. Let's set some examples. For instance, we said that what we want is access when we have an unmet treatment need. That was one of the principles, that we will pay when something has showed with value-based data that it has treatment value. Is this a principle that's being maintained? Due to these clawbacks and reimbursements and the different channels, like Olympios said, and the protections and breakdowns and channels and little channels and whatever, instead of thinking where a patient must be treated, where they must go to find their drugs, we're starting and quarreling that they shouldn't do this through this channel, the other is broken, this is stable, this is protected, and this has a cap. Are we being serious? Seriously now? And in the previous panel with the pharmacists, we asked that, where is the care for patients? Where must they go to receive their treatment? We have ended up forgetting that and starting deciding which channel has a groove and it can absorb more, not to have a clawback. This is surrealistic. We talked about a system that's all about easier access, correct? And as we heard, according to the weight indicator, this access is being lost and it's being threatened. So what have we been hearing all these days? New procedures, new processes, new organizations, new HTA, new committees that do not communicate with one another. This is what I'm afraid of. Instead of having, from an introduction to negotiation, reimbursement and access, we will start talking now about other committees that will pass the buck to one another. Now, in order not to demystify everything, Mr. Nikas, we will still be paying the average clawback of the channel. So what's the point? Why do all these studies if we go back to what is the average in the channel that you have? There's no point. Moving on to the third thing, the overall performance of what we talked about. Yes, expenditure is on the rise. There are no mechanisms that we have found and that we can redistribute the resources. But I continue with what we started, that we will pay where there's a need and we will save money from where there's an alternative. And in this framework, I understand the Greek industry investments, but maybe we don't need that. We may not need that. We may need clinical trials, which I hope that in the next panel we'll have the opportunity to discuss with the Minister, to discuss about innovation, to talk about make the wheels turn faster, not slower. So I wouldn't want to say the same thing, but I'm skeptical with what I'm hearing, that this innovation is coming, these developments are indeed coming, and I suspect that apart from the political will, the willingness and the measures, we need to make a decision not to sum up things and pile up things that do not work. We're all about performance. But each of us performance may be different. The performance for the health system. Thank you very much. Thanasis, you as the industry, do you have the answer about this, the drug issue?
Of course, we have an answer. And I would like to combine this with what was said previously. Undoubtedly, the effective solutions are not the most costly ones. We want to get the best result for the patient, and we want also to have a scaling, if you like, of what we reimburse, for whom, and at what cost. Always focusing on the optimal therapeutic result. That is why we believe that it is extremely useful to increase the footprint on the local market of the treatments that are cost-effective, either with the added value drugs or with the biosimilars or with the generics, and thus create a fiscal space. I would just like to note on something you said, Kostas, about the critical medicines, if you allow me. Right now, apart from the challenges that we are all aware of in the NHS and that have to do with the issues we all know and we all are grappling with, there is something wider, something more general, and that is the dependence of the European market on third countries. And we need to advance fast as Europe in order for us to become independent. One of the things we can do is to take this initiative for critical medicines. I would like to note that the local pharmaceutical industry can truly produce a large number of the critical medicines that are in the list of Europe. Of course, we are waiting for the updating of the list by EMI. I know that you are also interested in that matter. That's why I'm mentioning it. And this is what will allow us to become independent from third countries and to differentiate our supply model. The pandemic showed us how fragile the supply chain is. So what we need to do is to create the value of self-efficiency and independence from the supply chains of third countries. Of course, this is based on predictability, on sustainability, and on all the things that we are talking about today, both at national and European level. Thank you very much. We will have time to talk about the European level. But Dimitris, I would like to ask you, you talked about value-based healthcare previously. How can your sector produce added value in this sector? We have many examples, I believe, from other countries. But also here in Greece, we have implemented such models.
In hospitals, there is, where what we call value-based care or risk-based agreement can operate effectively. And we can have measurable results. That is, the hospital can know that the specific treatment, on the basis of indices that we have determined, brings about this effect, and if the one promising this result will be reimbursed 100%. Otherwise, he will have a lower reimbursement. So things have been done. So it could be nice to have it reproduced. And I'll go back to what Olympios and Labrina have said. They said Olympios has, it's the issue of mentality. This mentality entails a cost. Health is wealth. That's a mentality. So each time one meets someone who is against and always think of cost and how will curtail the cost, takes into consideration comorbidity, loss work hours and so forth. So this is the mentality we must change. We've seen in Greece, I saw in the Netherlands, they get the cost by changing the way they made the spinal and orthopedic operations. And not solely. They have created a whole program, HDA value. And this may be perhaps annoying us and not easily understandable. Why would we not have this change of mentality? And I'll come back to what Olympios has said. It's an issue of mentality. Well, thank you. I don't want to tie you. Let us go back to what happens in Europe. Taking into consideration the open policy issues, are we optimistic that we will come out more stronger, or things will stay business as usual? Now, you come now to a European context. I believe that Europe is currently facing a series of challenges. Geopolitical, first of all, which of course have an impact on economy, and at the end of the day, in the space of health as well. We currently have been asking through FPA and more beneficial environment for investments for R&D in Europe. I believe that the last 2 years, the things we do from the USA must further enhance the disposition of Europe to sustain, support this sector. And because a lot is being told about tariffs, commitments, and so forth, I believe that the American president is even more unpredictable than Klobuchar. That is, he changes his views on tariffs so often. On the other hand, if tariffs are imposed on imported drugs from the USA, then we'll have various problems occurring. And this approach to increase prices there so as to have them reduced in the USA may be well-based. The point is how applicable it will be. But such a kind of offset might perhaps help in a better balance. Although the American system is radically different from the view things I know, and a lot of distortions with greater particularities, if you like. Well, I would like to say that every country will have a choice to make. But definitely, no matter what the balance will be found in the two sides of the Atlantic, there will be those who will invest in technology and development and those who will stay behind with business as usual. I do not believe that there is, being a scientist, if you like, there is no state that cannot invest. The new modality will speak of therapeutic substance, diagnostic device, and therapeutical monitoring through a program as a follow-up nursing, whatever. That's the future. Now, if we want to lag behind, of course, this is our choice. It is our choice. This is most important. I see Dimitris agrees in that. I also agree. I would like to add we must be proud because the Greek industry is in the foreground vis-à-vis the EU pharmaceutical policy. We're strategic interlocutors vis-à-vis on strategic autonomy and self-sufficiency. Furthermore, let me add that the productive model of the country represents 12% of the EU productive human resources. So we must be equitable interlocutor in the European institutions so as to claim the strategic self-sufficiency of Europe that also passes through the domestic production. Thank you. Last comment. The pandemic and geopolitical crisis demonstrated the gaps. As far as Europe is concerned, it must have a separate policy on medical devices, placing the emphasis on self-sufficiency. And the second point is digital transformation. This is how interlinkage of health data is a foundation. So we leave this discussion, my most favorite point, but I hope that we will have the opportunity next year to start from this point. And also, we stop exactly at the time allocated, and we give the floor to the next session. Thank you.